welcome to Media Spectrum, where stories still matter. Today we're going to be reviewing District 9 by Neil Blomkamp. This movie came out in summer of 2009, so God, this was between my junior year and senior year of high school, which makes me feel really, really old now. And it was a pretty big success. It was on a budget of only about $30 million and made over $200 million. And critically, it did very well, receiving 4 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. This was the Hollywood debut of Neil Blomkamp, who was discovered by Peter Jackson. Yeah, that Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson. And Peter Jackson actually was the one who provided most of the funding for this movie. He helped with the cameras. His company, Weta, did a lot of the CGI work. So they were very much linked, and Peter Jackson's name was definitely a big part of the marketing of this back when it came out. Another interesting thing to think back on is at the time, Peter Jackson and Neil Blomkamp were attached to a prospective Halo movie. And so when this came out, a lot of people, I remembered, went to see it, largely because they thought it was going to be kind of a preview of what a live-action Halo might potentially look like. Sadly, that project never happened. I'm sure whatever movie they would have done would have been infinitely better than that cultural hate crime Paramount shout out.
Hello, can I have your attention for a moment, please?
What are you doing?
To those of you who haven't heard of me, I'm Cortana. I'll be working with Master Chief to provide logistical and tactical support for Silver Team.
No, I didn't summon you.
Summon me?
Thankfully, we did get this movie at least, and this movie is pretty great. Now, maybe this is just my bubble speaking, but I feel like this movie's been kind of almost forgotten. Like, I don't hear mentioned when people are talking about great sci-fi movies. I don't see a mention when people are bringing up great movies of the 2000s. And it really deserves to be remembered. And this was a movie that I kind of remembered. I remembered the basic setup. I remember the ending of it. But it's been years since I've seen this. And I remember being really impressed with it back in the day. But it's been long enough since I've seen it, probably like a decade plus by now, that I wasn't quite sure if it would hold up. And thankfully, it largely does. There's like 1 or 2 elements that I do have issues with that I'll address, but overall, this movie is held up very, very well. Now, the premise of this movie is pretty fascinating. The idea is that this big alien mothership just shows up in the skies over Johannesburg, South Africa, and it just stops and lets all these aliens out. And this isn't an invasion, this isn't a rapture, this isn't war being declared, anything like that. These aliens are just simple workers for all intents and purposes, and for whatever reason, we don't know what happened on their homeworld, we don't know if they were fleeing something, we don't know if their ship just broke down, but they don't seem to have anywhere else to go, so they're stuck here. They are very literally illegal aliens. And this is one of the most like ground versions of an alien invasion I've seen in any Hollywood movie. Like I said, there's no conspiracy, they're just here. The only thing it even remotely reminds me of is that South Park episode where a bunch of people from the future show up desperate for jobs. It's kind of that type of situation, but treated a lot more straight-faced here for sure.
They took our jobs!
They took your job! They took your job! They took your job!
So these aliens show up in Johannesburg, and of course, they're met with scorn.
They're spending so much money to keep them here when they could be spending it on other things. At least they're keeping them separate from us.
All over the place, there are no alien signs. A lot of businesses will not accept aliens. Restaurants won't serve them. Plus, they won't even eat a lot of the same food, so there's obviously cultural clashes, and people just hate them. There's very naked anti-alien sentiment pretty much everywhere you go.
They must just go. I don't know where they go, and they must just go.
And so what ends up happening to these aliens is they get put into a big internment camp called District 9 that is basically just a bunch of these really rinky-dink shacks that is preyed upon by criminal organizations, and it's just a hotbed for all kinds of nasty activity. There's interracial prostitution going on. There's aliens selling their weapons, which only the aliens can fire because they're like biologically programmed to them. But these criminal gangsters still want them. They still want to figure out they can do something with them, so they trade them food for these weapons. You know, and it just, in general, it becomes just a real hot spot for crime. So what this movie basically is about is following what happens when a government agency that runs this district invents a new district, District 10, that's more outside of the city and is even grimmer in a lot of ways. It just has tents. It really looks up more and more like a straight-up concentration camp. And they are trying to move the aliens from District 9 to District 10. And without going into any details, I'm going to try to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible. Things immediately go bad. Like, immediately go bad. And we basically follow the spiraling chaos over the next 3 days as things just grow more and more out of control. So first off, to address kind of the allegory, what this movie's about, this is totally about apartheid. It is 1000% an allegory for apartheid, very specifically. For those of you who don't know, I imagine most people have at least heard the term, but apartheid was the racial segregation between black and white people that happened in South Africa that lasted from 1948 to 1994. Now, I'm not a scholar on this topic, I'm not an expert on it by any means, but I imagine most of us have at least heard of it. It's something that gets referenced a lot, especially if you grew up in the 90s like I did. There's lots of media, lots of movies, lots of TV shows that reference it in some capacity. Some, of course, are about it. Just from what I know about this, it was a much nastier overall segregation than what happened in America, and it lasted quite a bit longer also. But the good thing is you don't need to know much about apartheid to enjoy or appreciate this movie. It's very clearly just about racism in general, even if you have any conception of racism, especially in Western colonized countries. There's a lot of very obvious commentary going on here. Like, even if you watch this purely through just a dumb American lens, the no alien signs are very, very reminiscent of the no blacks signs that were in restaurants and small businesses throughout the South and even other places in the 1960s. There's a whole element to this movie where the aliens get weirdly addicted to cat food of all things and start trading their weapons for that. And it reminded me a lot about what I know about the whiskey trade from the Native Americans, where we came in, got Native Americans kind of addicted to whiskey, and they traded a lot more than what it was really valuable for. And it was one of the big factors that kind of destroyed the Native American community, unfortunately. Also, the aliens are giving very Western names. Like, the main alien character that we have in this movie is named Christopher Johnson. And that was very typical in pretty much any colonized society, especially societies with slaves, that if they do name them, they often give them very white Western names. They'll rename people because they just can't pronounce their native names to something recognizable, kind of almost generic. So it's hard watching this movie not to think about our own history, about our Japanese and German camps back during World War II, obviously what we know about what happened in Europe during World War II, and even a lot of the ICE Gestapo shit that's happening today. This is a movie that unfortunately has aged very well and is still very relevant. It's a movie where, like, because of what it's dealing with, I almost wish it was less relevant, but nope, it's still as relevant an issue today as it was back when this came out. Also, just one thing I want to address real quick is I've seen some people describe this movie as a satire, and I don't agree with that. I did compare it to that South Park episode, which very much is a satire, but that's a lot more comical, it's a lot more absurdist. And satire doesn't even necessarily need to be absurd. Like, I would consider Fight Club to be a satire. But satire needs to be, like, mocking something. Satire is the author making fun of an idea or an institution. And I don't feel like that's what this movie is doing at all. I don't feel like it's mocking or teasing or making fun of anything. It's showing it in a very sober, straight-faced way. It is using metaphor. It's using allegory. That's what I would call this movie, an allegory. But we could have a debate on whether you think it's a satire or not. I don't agree, but if you think it is, make an argument in the comments below. But yeah, again, regardless of how you want to categorize this, I do think the main points are still very, very, very valid to this day. Now, one of the really wonderful things about this movie is how unique the filming style is. I completely forgot the documentary angle. I completely forgot that for about the first 20 minutes, this movie is literally filmed as a documentary. It's not real, obviously. It's not mocking. It's just a fake documentary. And the way that it's put together feels very real. It feels like a documentary you would be watching on Netflix. They do a really good job of using mixed media, of having these interviews, of having security CTV footage, of having like dashboard cam footage from cops' cars, of having footage from helicopters overview, all this very different types of media footage edited together in a way you would see in a documentary. And in the documentary portion, they're kind of going back and forth in time. We keep cutting to like after the movie where people are referring back to this incident that happened. And then furthermore, we're introduced to our main character. I think it's pronounced Vickis. It's spelled with a W, but I'm pretty sure W's are pronounced as a V in South Africa. So I'm going to pronounce it Vickis. If it turns out I'm wrong, I'm sure you will politely let me know in the comments. We're introduced to our main character, Vickis, who is the manager that's overseeing this project of transferring the aliens from District 9 to District 10. And he seems like nice enough. He seems like a pleasant office worker, friendly enough guy. He doesn't seem super competent. He seems kind of meek. But that's our main character we're getting introduced to. But as we're, seeing footage of him talking about his wife, talking about his father-in-law, and it's heavily implied that he's a nepotism hire, we're also cutting to people from later on describing him as a traitor, saying, I can't believe he did that. I had no idea he could do something like that. So we know that there's going to be some sort of big incident, and we know he's going to be heavily, heavily involved. They do a really good job of teasing stuff that's going to happen without actually telling us, and I appreciate that. And then as the movie goes on, we start using more and more normal cinematic footage, but even that is all handheld and feels very, very guerrilla, feels very down to earth and grounded and gritty. And in a weird way, each act of the movie almost feels like a different sort of genre. Act 1 is, like I said, mostly this kind of documentary, this very grounded sort of almost political thriller in documentary form. Then something happens, and I don't even want to spoil it here, but I'll just say Act 2 takes a pretty wild, sharp left turn into some different things that really caught me off guard, but work very, very well. And then by the third act, it's just a full-on explosion-fueled action blockbuster. And it's all wrapped up in this fascinating kind of sci-fi wrapper. Now, talking about the characters, there are technically a lot of people in this movie, but most of them are very incidental. Most of them we barely spend any amount of time with. This is really a two-person show. Our main character is Vickis, played by Charlton Copley. And this is such a fascinating role, because he's a guy who, like I said, initially seems very nice, very friendly, maybe a little meek. It's heavily implied that he's a nepotism hire thanks to his big shot government father-in-law. But then we actually see the process of this transferring begin. And we start seeing a very different side to Vickis, where he just takes such joy in cruelty. And he's like this fascinating, smiling Nazi. Like, he finds such joy in finding this shack that's basically being used as an alien birthing pod where they've set up eggs. And he starts taking the life tubes out of eggs and giving them to the soldiers as souvenirs of their first abortion.
Finally, we take ours back. The little guy has gone to a nice little sleep now. Just pop him out, there we go. And pop him out here. There, you can take that. You want to keep it as a souvenir for your first abortion, eh? You can feel like you did one at least, you know?
Yes, boss.
Where's the team now?
And then they burn the shack down, and you hear the eggs popping. And he compares it to popcorn, and he's kind of giggling about it.
That's a popping sound that you're hearing. It's almost like a popcorn. What the egg does is it pops up. You know, the little guy, what's left of him, pops out there. So that's the sound that you are hearing with the popping.
And it is just such a unusual and very chilling portrayal of evil. This is the kind of evil we saw a lot of in World War II, that we see a lot of in pretty much any sort of combat zone, I would imagine, where a seemingly normal person shows a capacity for just finding such delight in cruelty and savagery and sadism. And he doesn't do anything to act evil. He never acts menacing. He's always very polite. He's very friendly as he's just doing really horrible things. And frankly, he kind of reminds me of people that I have met in real life where, let's face it, I'm a big, bald-headed, bearded white dude. People see me, they make some assumptions. And I have met, over the years, a fair amount of very, very friendly other white guys who I got along with really well at first, who were super friendly, super chill. And then something happens and they start talking about blacks. They start talking about Mexicans. They start talking about gays. They start talking about Muslims. They start talking about whatever other group they have a prejudice against, saying the most abhorrent, hateful things with a smile on their face, all while just assuming that I agree with them because I look like them. And this guy just matches that sort of real life energy that I've seen so well. It is kind of chilling. He's a South African actor. I would not be surprised if he's seen stuff like this from fellow South Africans during the time when he was growing up. He's old enough where he was living through apartheid, so I'm sure that influences his performance in this. And as the movie goes on, he has a hell of a character arc. As things happen, circumstances kind of force him to start seeing things from the alien's point of view more and more. And he keeps kind of going back and forth. There'll be a segment of the movie where he starts feeling a lot more human and sympathetic. Then he'll double down on being a self-serving asshole and you'll hate him again. Then he'll show some redemptive qualities. Then he'll kind of undo those. Be prepared to change how you feel about this guy probably 3 or 4 times by the time the movie's done. And it is so fascinating just watching his journey and trying to guess, is he ultimately going to break good or break bad? And we do get a fairly definitive answer at the end, but he's a very morally gray, very complex character. Our other main performance comes from Jason Cope as Christopher Johnson, the alien. And this has to be one of the best mocap performances I've seen from an actor not named Andy Serkis. He does such a good job of playing this alien who's intelligent. He's part of this resistance movement. He has a son who he cares for very, very much. He really shows more humanity than almost any of the actual humans in this movie. Certainly more than Vicus does. And I also didn't realize this till I was kind of looking into the cast. He actually does appear in the film in human form also. He's one of the main speakers during the documentary portions.
The doors didn't open for 3 months. It just hovered there. Nobody could get in. And they eventually decided, after much deliberation, that the best thing to do would be to physically cut their way in.
And when they're doing voiceovers in those, he's one of the main voiceovers as well. I also have to talk about the special effects and the action in this. This was from Weta, which was the same group that did the effects for Lord of the Rings and Peter Jackson's King Kong. Overall, great work is always from them. The aliens in particular look fantastic. Like, there's a few scenes, especially when they're on some grainy security footage or something, where they look a little bit off. But in all the regular footage, the aliens look so incredibly lifelike. It's fascinating to me. And Christopher Johnson especially, his face is so emotive. Watching him clearly express emotion and feeling with very non-human eyes is incredibly impressive to me. I often see Davy Jones brought up as like one of the most impressive CGI creations ever, but he still had human eyes to work with. This character doesn't even have that, and he still gets his emotions across. So incredibly well done work in my view. And naturally, as the movie continues, we do eventually start seeing these alien weapons in action. And it is incredibly impressive and also a little concerning, the creativity they demonstrate in finding different ways to blow up and de-life people. There's a point where you see a man get killed with a pig. Yeah, a swine used as a lethal weapon. I won't specify how, you have to see the movie for yourself, but yeah, it is wild, especially getting deep into the third act, just how crazy some of this alien weaponry is and the things it can do. And I forgot also just how insane the gore in this movie gets. Thankfully, in more or less a fun way. There's a couple parts that are not so much, that do make you kind of feel it in an uncomfortable way. But there's like just a chunkiness to how these people blow up and how limbs fly and giant globs of blood fly around. It really does remind me of like a video game more than a movie. Just the way they depict the blood and violence. And there's such a sense of escalation with this. From the first act through the third act, things just keep gradually growing bigger, gradually growing crazier, gradually growing more violent. So that when you get to just the absolute chaos of the third act, it feels natural, it feels earned, it feels like something that we organically got to. And so it's not a dumb action movie. Like, it really does take its time to develop the situation, to make you care about these characters, to make you care about what they're doing and why, so that when these huge action scenes come, they really, really hit, not just on a visceral level, but on like an intellectual and even emotional level. Now, for what I don't like about this movie, for my critiques about it, the Nigerian gang. And oh boy, this is weird and uncomfortable. So there's this gang of Nigerians that prey on the aliens. They give them bad deals and find other ways to screw them over. And the way they are depicted is so just gross, frankly. Like, they are depicted in the most animalistic, savage type of way. It's almost cartoonish how far they go with this. And this would be weird and problematic in pretty much any movie, but especially in a movie like this, where it's literally an allegory for racism, to then be super racist in the way they depict a group of people. It's very strange. It doesn't feel good. It feels like there was some cognitive dissonance in the assignment. It's like, imagine if you were watching a movie set in the antebellum South, talking about race divisions between black and white people at that time. And it's doing a really nuanced, powerful job of it. And then here comes this gang of villainous Chinese people that are being portrayed in the most cartoonish, ridiculously stereotypical ways imaginable. It's so bizarre. It really undercuts a lot of what the movie's trying to say, and it just feels very ill thought out, ill planned, and just leaves a really kind of bad taste in my mouth. And the thing is, they easily could have had most of this stay the same, just change the portrayal a little bit, just make them a little more grounded, a little more human. Take away, like, there's even a whole thing, I'll give a spoiler alert for this one part. They believe that by consuming the alien's flesh, they will gain their power and be able to use the weapons. Now, here's the thing. There is a kind of logic in, well, if we consume their DNA, maybe that'll give us the DNA we need to use their weaponry. But the whole eat of this thing and you will absorb its power is such a weird, old tribal trope. And I'm not saying there's no precedents for it. There are histories of groups of people genuinely believing this. And around the world today, there are, in fact, areas where people do believe this. But to put them to that level in this movie just seems to undercut so much of what the movie's trying to say and feels very off-putting. This is something where you could have easily just tweaked it just a little bit to have made it a little more rational, a little more understandable. And maybe also show the Nigerians facing prejudice from the white South Africans as well. Because there are plenty of real-life incidents in which different groups of oppressed people still prey upon each other. And I think that would have added to this. So I'm not saying wipe out the Nigerians completely. I'm not saying you have to rewrite the story in that way. They do add a real element of chaos into this. But it's just the way they were depicted, like I said, it's really problematic. It's very, very strange. I'll also say that in the third act, it does lose a little bit of esteem for me as it becomes like the most traditional movie. By the third act, the documentary footage is largely forgotten about until the ending, basically. And it's not that it's bad. Like I said, there is such a great sense of escalation where they build to this huge cinematic showdown, but it is just something that I've seen more before. The documentary beginning was so fascinating and interesting to me that I wish they could have cut that a little more throughout the third act and not forgotten about that element of it so much. It would have kept things more interesting to me. I think this movie is at its best when it's rapidly going between different types of media, which is something that could be very, very gimmicky, but this movie does it so well that I enjoy that part of it the best, and I wish that they would have retained some of that going into the later parts of this movie. And honestly, pretty much both of these critiques come down to largely adding or subtracting content. This movie is about an hour and 50 minutes long. I feel like they either should have trimmed some stuff with the Nigerians and reduced that, which would have naturally made the third act a bit more compact, and condensed this into an even more taut-tight, just pure adrenaline rushing thriller.
Yes, you are tight like a tiger.
Or I think they should have fleshed them out, added some scenes, pushed this to more about a 2.5-hour movie, and really leaned into the drama, character study aspect of it. As it is, they try to split the difference, and the result is a very, very good movie that, like I said, was extremely successful. But I do question if this is the best possible version of it. I feel like they kind of try to have their cake and eat it too, and that rarely, if ever, works. So overall, this is a movie that I think did hold up really well, other than the unfortunate depiction of the Nigerians. It is such a unique movie. It is one of the best uses of mixed media I've seen from a Hollywood film. The special effects have aged incredibly, incredibly well. The core message of the movie is something that still resonates very much to this day. I think it's well worth watching. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it. There's a huge aspect of this movie I haven't even talked about because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the movie. And if you have seen it, you know, if it's been a while, I think it's worth rewatching. You might be pleasantly surprised. So anyway, those are my thoughts on District 9. I truly thank you guys if you stuck around to this point. And I'll see you guys next time. Until then, stay sane, stay human.